serving as your chairman of the Bristol Chamber of Commerce Board. Thank you for coming in on an early Wednesday morning. As you know, the purpose of this meeting, this event, you can call it Town Hall, is to discuss the Bristol, Virginia landfill. And just to give you a little bit of background, a few weeks ago, we're talking with the executive committee and Beth Reinhardt about what can the chamber do regarding this important community issue. We're all aware of the issue. Many of us live in close proximity to the landfill. I know I personally do. I know several of the council members of Bristol, Virginia City Council live in close proximity to the landfill. So obviously this is a huge, important issue, not only for Bristol, Virginia and its residents, but also for Bristol, Tennessee and its citizens. So we're thinking, what can we do as a chamber? Obviously, we're not environmental engineers. We're not landfill management experts. But what we can do for our members is provide the free flow of information, make sure you as members have as much information regarding this important issue as you possibly can. So to that point, we asked Bristol, Virginia City Manager Randy Eads if he would like to come speak to our board, our last board meeting, which he readily agreed and spent probably 20, close to 30 minutes giving a briefing to the chamber board. But we thought it was also important as members that you have that same opportunity to hear directly from the city, to hear from their consultants, from DEQ, from the state on what is going on with the landfill, what their proposals are to resolve the issue, and then give you an opportunity at the end of today to also ask some questions and have a little bit of a Q&A time. So we really appreciate you coming out, your interest. Hopefully you can be better informed about this issue when you leave. Obviously the chamber is hopeful that we'll have a viable and quick solution to this matter, but as you will hear, it's a complex issue. There's no easy answers, but we at least want to have this opportunity as a member benefit to you all to hear directly from the city, and then again, like I said, have some questions. So at first, Randy Eads is going to come up and give his presentation. Then Ernie Huck, their consultant for the city, who's on Zoom, is also going to have a few comments. And then Jeff Hurst from DEQ is here. He doesn't have a presentation, but he's going to be here for the Q&A portion of this. And for those of you not familiar with DEQ, that's the Virginia State equivalent to the EPA. And they've been directly, as you know, probably reading the papers and the media, have been assisting the city and on the ground here, just like the EPA has. So again, we appreciate you being here this morning on this critical issue. And Randy, I'd like to ask you to come up and do your presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate everyone coming out today. As Jason mentioned, I'm Randy Eads, the city manager and city attorney for Bristol, Virginia. And I want to thank Beth and Jason for allowing me the opportunity to come and talk to members of the chamber about the landfill and the issues that have been going on at the landfill and how we plan on resolving those moving forward. I also want to thank my IT staff, Rick Belcher, Gene Christian. They're here today. They helped set up a lot of the IT stuff. And then my assistant, Joey Lange, he's the one who put together the presentation. So if I don't know what's in the presentation, it's because Joey's put it together. So what we're going to cover today, we'll talk about the past history of the landfill, we'll talk about the current issues that we have, we'll talk about how we're going to move forward, we're going to talk about what if these gas wells don't work, what if they do work, and then I'll answer some of the frequently asked questions. But the first and foremost, anything I say here today is not going to change the past, and anything I say today is not going to change the future. The only thing that's going to change the future is taking action. And we've been taking action on this issue since mid-December of 2020. I know it's not moving as quickly as people want it to move. It's definitely not moving as quickly as I want it to move. But we are moving forward in the right direction. It's just going to take some time. So I really want to start out with the frequently asked questions, because these are the things that I see on social media that I get asked in public quite a bit. And I just want to knock these things out of the way, and much of the presentation will cover these questions as well. So does the city make money from the landfill? No. I mean, and we'll have a slide on that here shortly. Every year, the general fund for the city So well, maybe not, but we need to change.
Yeah.
So every year, for the past 20 or so years, the city has had to put money from the general fund into the solid waste disposal fund. The solid waste disposal fund is a separate entity, or not a separate entity, but a separate fund within the city of Bristol, Virginia. And to make that fund break even, the city has put significant sums of money into that fund over the past 20 odd years. So is this the only landfill the city has ever had? No. There's actually 2 additional landfills adjacent to the current landfill, and they've been there since the early 60s. One was there from the 60s to the 70s, and then the second landfill was there from the 70s to the late 90s. I get asked questions a lot about where are the liners. You hear us talk about liners quite a bit. Liners are a membrane that separate the rock quarry from clay and from the waste that's going into the landfill. So that liner is what's protecting groundwater and all the things that people are concerned about that could potentially be leaking into the groundwater system, and that liner is there to protect that. We also have clay that helps protect it, plus that landfill is at the very low point of our water table in that area, so all the water from the surrounding area actually flows to the bottom of that landfill. So another question I get asked is, where would the city take its waste if the city had to close the landfill? Well, we would do what Bristol, Tennessee did a few years ago. They chose to, instead of using our landfill, they chose to take it to advanced disposal down in Bristol, Tennessee. We would put out an RFP and take our waste to the most economical place for the city of Bristol, Virginia. How many people have complained? Since May 7th, when we started the online submission form, we've had 1,495 complaints since May 7th. That averages to about 8.3 complaints a day. Over the past couple of months, we've seen that jump significantly to probably 50 to 75 complaints a day. Can the landfill be closed? Yes, is the short answer. And then there's a longer answer to that, and we'll get to that here shortly. And how long would it take to close the landfill? Well, there's actually 2 answers. You have the current trajectory that we're on, it would take probably 23 to 25 years to close it. And the other option would be to have an early closure, which would consist of either filling the current landfill up at a greater rate of waste than what we're doing now to close it early, or if there is a plan that was feasible to close it as it sits right now, and we're in the process of reviewing all those options. So here's a picture of the landfill from several years ago. You can see there is a lack of what's called cover up towards the north end of the landfill. The north is at the top of your screen. You can see a little bit of clay there, and then down towards the southern portion, there's not as much clay. And then here is a picture that was taken, I believe, in August of this past year. You can see that there's clay cover over the majority of the landfill at this point. There is a working face down in the southwest corner of the landfill, which is now at the top of your screen. We have made that working face a little bit smaller than what it is right now, and we're continuing to put clay cover on top of that to help stop the spread of the odors emanating from the landfill. So let's just talk about the rock quarry landfill. This is a picture of the rock quarry when it first opened. You can see at the very bottom of the quarry there's clay, and you can see the black liner going up the rock walls. That is the liner that we keep talking about, and that liner, every 2 to 3 years we have to install new liners so that as we bring the waste up, we're protecting the rock quarry wall and protecting the environment from the waste. So the quarry dimensions, it's about 1,500 feet long at the base and ranges from 130 to 250 feet wide at the top. At the current closure plan, the top of the cover system would be approximately 1,950 feet long, and it would be 430 to 650 feet wide. We'll talk more about that closure plan here, Ernie will talk more about that here shortly. The depth of the current landfill is 300 to 400 feet, depending on where you're at. And the remaining depth to fill the landfill is 100 feet to 150 feet. So let's talk a little bit about the history here. The history of this landfill goes all the way back to 1989, and city officials envisioned turning the Vulcan Materials rock quarry into a landfill as early as 1989, and a feasibility study was conducted in 1990. So they had several issues with getting the permit. In August 23 of 1995, the DEQ said normal landfill permit would take 6 to 10 months to review it. October 7th of 95, the city was frustrated by the delay because they had submitted that permit previous to August 23rd of 95, and they asked then State Senator William Walker to inquire the status of the permit. And then on February 15th at 1:15 p.m., DEQ faxed the city to sign permit. And at the time, Bill Dennison was the assistant city manager, and he stated, once they got that permit, since I've been involved in this in some shape or form for over 11 years, including 5 years with the city, I'd say this is an understatement, talking about whether or not he was happy with receiving that permit. And then on March 3rd of 1998, the first bale of trash was deposited into the landfill. So you can see this was about a 9 or 10 year process for the city to even be able to put the first bale of trash into the landfill. Here is articles from May 24th of 1994. I was a junior in high school back in 1994. I remember reading about this at that time. So the group, there were several people in the community that talked about the landfill and the concerns that they had with the landfill. And that was even a concern. We're now 27 years since that date. So the landfill opened on March 3rd of 1998. And then on May the 19th, the officials gathered together to dedicate that new landfill. So in 1996 is when the permit was issued. So they had to have the permit before they could actually start the work. And it took them roughly 2 years to complete that work. Here's an interesting bit of numbers for you. From 1998 to 2009, the rate of the waste collection for residential waste was $4 per month. And in 2010, they increased that to $11 a month. I came on board in July of 2017. We increased that in the spring of 18 to $22 a month, and then we increased it again in 2019 to $33 a month. And that's just on the residential waste. That's the only thing that the city has control over when it comes to the pricing at the landfill. Pricing for commercial haulers is based simply on the demand that we have. And with so many landfills in our region, we lose businesses to other landfills on a yearly basis, and sometimes we gain business. But I can tell you, for the most part, landfills are charging between $20 and $25 per ton for waste that they are accepting. So that's where we're at on most of our contracts, $20 to $25 per ton. You know, I would love to go up to $35 or $40 a ton. It's just not feasible based on market conditions. So let's talk about the total cost of the city. Currently, there's roughly $34.9 million of general obligation debt that's outstanding. These numbers are as of June 30th, 2020. My CFO would want me to point that out. We do not have the updated audit yet. We'll get that here in the next month. Plus, the transfers to the general fund, which I talked about a moment ago. In 2016, the Auditor of Public Accounts required the city of Bristol to write off $22.1 million worth of debt that the general fund had loaned to the solid waste disposal fund. They said there was no feasible way for the solid waste disposal fund to pay that back, therefore you must write it off. So they wrote off the $22.1 million. That gave us a net position of negative 20, or the net position as of 6/30/20 was negative $25.5 million. Total cost of the city is $82.6 million is what this landfill will cost us. In the spring of 2018, I distinctly remember standing in front of council, and we were talking about the landfill at the time, and I told them, I didn't know how right I was. I told them this landfill will cost the city more than the falls will ever cost the city. And we're well on the way to beating what the falls will ever cost the city. So let's talk about the current issues. So last November, we started receiving odor complaints. That's not unusual. It seems every fall, October, November, we get or at least I would hear a few odor complaints at my office. And the typical response was, based on discussions with engineers and our consultants, is as the temperature cools, you have a weather inversion. It does not allow the gases to escape high enough, and therefore the gases are kept at a lower level, and that's why you have it. And eventually, everything equalizes and odors go away. And that's typically what I've seen. For the past 4 years, I drive out of the landfill every morning to work, and for a couple of 3 weeks, October, November, you would smell the landfill, and then you would not smell the landfill after that. However, last year, those odor complaints kept coming. And it was about mid-December when we realized, okay, this is something more significant than what we've had in the past. That's when I called Draper Aiden, and I called SDS and said, hey guys, I need y'all's assistance. We've got some issues. So we started working on this in mid-December of 2020. And then in the last week of December, right after Christmas, I met with the DEQ out at the landfill one night. I think it was December 27th or 28th. It was probably one of the worst nights up until that point that we had smelled. And I think they took some air samples that night along with my staff as well. We began tracking the odor complaints. We also have an app called Smell My City. So if you don't have that app downloaded, you can go in there. If you do smell a landfill, you can pinpoint your location. It records it. We can download all that information. But the official tracking that we use is on our website. And those complaints vary based on time of day, weather conditions. It's just, there's really no rhyme or reason for why the smells are when they are. It's not because I have a switch that I flip that many people say that I do. We can't explain why it's worse at certain times. We've looked at one point back in August, we had the electricity go out at the landfill on 2 separate occasions. In Jinko, which is the gas company that burns the gas to produce electricity, they were not able to run when the electricity was out. So we ran a flare, ran it for about 24 hours each of those nights, and it appeared that the odor complaints decreased during that time period. It was a Friday night, or the second time we did this, and I thought, okay, maybe we've got a solution here. Maybe we need to run that flare more instead of sending things to a Jinko. So we were running that flare all weekend, and again on Saturday night, my wife and I were out for a romantic dinner, driving around smelling to the landfill, and unfortunately, the odor was back. So there was no correlation, at least that I can tell, whether or not a Jinko is getting gas and burning gas, or whether it's a flare. So that theory was taken off the table, because if it was because of a Jinko, we would have burned the flare continuously to prevent that odor, but that's not necessarily the case. And the complaints have continued. So what did we do to initially deal with the odor mitigation? So we began evaluating what the causes of odors were as early as December 17th. And at that time, Draper Aiden and SCS had started reviewing the landfill, and we needed to do improvements to our existing gas wells, our dewatering system infrastructure. And they were targeting our landfill gas extraction lines in, there were 2 areas of concern. So we added 2 6-inch header pipes and dewatering efforts in the southeast corner of the landfill with a new 12-inch sump pump. Water is an enemy of the landfill. And by virtue of being in a rock quarry, every bit of rainwater that falls goes into that landfill. And that's not good for a landfill. Plus, you've also got the groundwater, which is underneath the landfill. However, that is not as much of a concern because you have the liner on the bottom of the landfill that prevents the groundwater from seeping into the landfill. But nonetheless, it's still an issue. It's a wet environment, and rainwater or any type of water mixed with solid waste is not good. So, as I mentioned previously, Draper Aiden was retained to begin working on this issue. As they continued to investigate, we noticed that we needed to expand our gas well system, and that's what we've been working on in the past few months. So we just recently installed our 21 new gas wells. Those were completed on October the 15th, and SCS engineers will be here on Thursday to begin the connection of those gas wells to our landfill gas collection system. That will take 40 to 50 days per the contract. It should be substantially complete within 40 days from November the 5th and be complete by 50 days from November the 5th. And if that's the case, it will be complete on Christmas Day, which will be the best Christmas present that I know many people in the community could ever ask for if this starts to work. One day we were initially going to start on November 8th, but we pushed that up a little bit. So as we connect these gas wells to the system, we'll probably connect 3 or 4 at a time, hopefully see an incremental decrease in odor. As you put in those gas wells, that creates a negative pressure and a vacuum that will start drawing those gases back into the system. And what we want to do is make sure that we're drawing all that gas back into the system so that they're not emanating from the landfill. It's going to take time to get that completed, but as I said, we're hoping by mid-December we'll have it complete and that the community will start noticing a significant difference in the odor that is coming from the landfill. So let's talk about all the things that we've done since January. We've installed leachate and condensate pumps, a poly tank and modified collection system to capture and remove condensate and leachate. So that was one of the first things that came to our consultants' mind when this issue came up. They realized that our gas lines were compromised, so we had to correct those. We have an odor management plan that we work with through DEQ, which includes the monitor city complaint forms. We monitor the Smell My City app. We respond to complaints. Every complaint that we get, we respond to. And then we're continually testing on a regular basis. We have an odor mitigation plan. That odor mitigation plan consists of a solution that is misted across the landfill in certain problem areas, and we're testing that now to determine whether that's working or not. And it's just a small pilot test. It's not a full system, so that's why people are not seeing a reduction in odor. It's just simply working in concentrated areas right now. We've got another system that we'll be looking at here shortly as well to see which one's going to best suit our landfill and what we need. We continually review the DEQ reporting documents that the city has been providing to DEQ. Everyone also knows that we have some benzene issues, and we work with BPU on reporting those benzene issues as we test and they test. We know what that benzene is that's going into our sewer system. We're working with Ingenco, that's the methane gas company that's producing electricity, so we work with them to try to fine-tune how much gas we're sending to them so they can be most efficient. As I mentioned before, we're testing air, leachate, we're taking 24-hour samples, we're testing gas wells and gas probes. We're currently investigating a subsurface reaction, and Ernie can talk more about that a little bit more. The next thing we have to fix is our wet well. A wet well is a 300-foot well that's adjacent. It's on the west side of the landfill that goes to the very bottom, and that's where all your leachate and gradient is pumped into, and then we pump that into our sewer system. So we went back in May or June and reviewed that wet well with a camera to see what issues are going on down there. We do know there's some issues. We'll have to send a person down this 300-foot shaft here shortly to go in and get us a better idea of what's going on. And we hope to have that project started in the next month or two. Benzene pretreatment, that's huge. That will probably be an 18-month project, and we'll start that RFP process sometime in January or February. That will consist of building a 1 million gallon storage tank. We will reroute our leachate and gradient water from the current sewer system into the 1 million gallon storage tank, where we will install air strippers that will agitate the water, which will evaporate the benzene out of the water, and we'll capture that to a charcoal filter and then dispose of that appropriately. We're also planning for additional monitoring wells to be installed east of the bus garage, where our current city buses are. It's kind of on the northwest side of the landfill, and we'll need to put in a couple of monitoring wells there to make sure we're not having any issues getting to the bus garage, or vice versa from the gas tanks that the city owns getting into our landfill. We'll monitor the southeast and other chimneys. You may have heard us talk about some chimneys that we know where a significant amount of gas is escaping. We're continuing to monitor those. We expect those chimneys to decrease as those wells are put in place. We're going to raise our old gas wells so that we can continue to put waste around those and make sure that they're working. We have to maintain our gas lines and our drain condensation lines in order for this to operate properly. With the new system that is going in, those gas lines will be installed on top of the waste instead of in the waste. Once they're in the waste, that waste compacts, which then creates issues with the condensate lines, and it makes a bow in those lines, which then catches water. It's kind of like a P-trap in your home. So when water is in those lines, the gas cannot get through. And by being able to put those lines on top, we'll be able to better monitor those moving forward. We'll continue to plan for additional gas wells. I know people think that when we're putting in gas wells, something's wrong. That's normal operating operating procedures for a landfill. You have to put in gas lines in order to extract gas. Sometimes wells go dry, for lack of a better term, and you have to put in a new well in order to continue to pull that methane out. And we've installed 21 gas wells. The main thing on this page is the flare. We replaced the previous flare. It was a 4-inch flare. We now have an 8-inch flare, and I know people on social media have talked about this. That's how we burn all the gases. And as we move forward, we will be able to not only burn the flare, but send gas to Ingenco at the same time. Those upgrades are going to take place mid-December with the company that's contracted with Ingenco to come in and take care of that for us. We're going to continue to put additional cover on the landfill to help keep that odor down. We've hired additional landfill staff. My landfill director is here today, John Paul Jones. He came on board in September. And we've also hired, I think, 3 additional staff members out there now. We have 1 opening left that we're trying to get filled. We have weekly calls with DEQ. That's every Monday. We have a call with DEQ. We give them updates on our process so that they know what is going on. At city council meetings, this is an item of discussion at basically just about every council meeting since January. I'm sure there's a few meetings where we have not discussed it. And on top of that, before the first meeting in every month, I have a 5:15 meeting with members of the community to give them updates as well. And we'll have another meeting here November 9th at 5:15 with community members before the council meeting. So how do we move forward? I already talked about the benzene mitigation. We'll have to work on that. As I said, that's an 18-month process at least to get that complete. Repairs to the wet well, we hope to have that complete by early spring, February or March. Flare upgrades will take place in December. So one question I always get asked is, what if the wells don't work? What do we do? Well, one thing that we'll have to do at that point is seal off the perimeter of the landfill where the waste meets the rock face. We'll seal that off in order to prevent gas from coming up near the liner. We'll add additional wells to continue to pull gas from the landfill. And we'll seek assistance from federal and state authorities. And I see some of my folks in here from Congressman Griffith's office and Senator Kane and Senator Warner's office as well. I've discussed this issue with them probably since March or April of this past year. I've also discussed it with our local delegation, Delegate O'Quinn and Senator Pillion. So they know there may be a point in time when I come to them and say we need additional assistance. At this point, I don't feel like it's appropriate for us to ask for money when we haven't completed the projects that will take care of the problem. So if it gives anyone a little bit of solace, this past week, on Monday, we had a discussion with some folks from Bridgeton, Missouri. And there is a rock quarry in Bridgeton, Missouri that was turned into a landfill in 1939. And part of that landfill, there's 2 landfills there. Part of the landfill, there was waste from the Manhattan Project that was disposed in that landfill. Well, the other landfill had a subsurface reaction. And that subsurface reaction continued to grow and is moving closer to the nuclear waste. But that subsurface reaction really caused an odor much like what we're experiencing here. And after that call on Monday, I feel more confident in that what we're doing is actually going to work. I know my consultant's on the line. He probably doesn't like me saying that, but at this point, we're 10 months into this process and we haven't seen any relief. So my hope has not been very high. After that phone call on Monday, I feel like we're doing the right things. I think Chris, Aaron, he's back in the back. I think he was on that call as well. And I hope he would say the same thing that I'm saying today based on that call. So what happens if the wells do work? So this is where our city council, this is why they get paid the big bucks. They're going to have to make a decision here shortly if this does work. We can continue to operate the landfill as a business and fund it appropriately and make sure it has the resources necessary to operate like it should until normal closure occurs. And as I said previously, that's a 23 to 25-year process. We could close the landfill early by filling it full of waste quicker. I have a plan for that that would take probably 5 to 7 years to get it full, but that would require a substantial amount of waste to get it full. And the other option is we could potentially close it as it sits right now. However, that's going to require significant engineering plans and work with DEQ in order to get that accomplished. But first and foremost, before we could ever close this landfill, we have to correct the issues that have been ongoing since December. And I hope I'm right to say this, Jeff, but unless that's corrected, I don't think DEQ is going to entertain a closure plan at this time until we get those issues corrected. So this is how we want to move forward. And council, as I said, at some point is going to have to make a choice as to how we move forward. But we have to do it in an environmentally responsible way, and we have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. And if we don't do it those two ways, we're going to do it wrong. And every time this city has listened to someone other than the experts, whether it's in regards to the falls or whether it was in regards to this landfill, there's always been a mistake. And we have experts on staff that have dealt with these issues that are telling us what we need to do to fix it, and we have to listen to our experts. Because this city cannot afford not to listen to the people that know how to deal with these issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Ernie here now, and he will kind of talk about the closure issues and give you a review of that.
Great, thank you, Randy. That was really a good overview. So what I'm going to try to talk about a little bit today is kind of wrap up some of the things that Randy said, but also, okay, why can't we close early? And, what are the challenges that we're going to be faced with to be able to do that? Let's go to the next slide. So this landfill, as you saw from some of those pictures from above, being a quarry, we have a substantial amount of room left in this landfill. It was much narrower down at the bottom, and at the top it expands quite a bit and it's much wider. So while it looks like in this photograph we don't have far to go, we actually have a lot of volume to go. And the plan for any landfill is to get the landfill up to a positive level, so the stormwater, rainwater will run off the landfill and not continually go into the waste. Again, that is really what's the challenge with this landfill on an ongoing basis. Next one. So you can see here, that's a lot of waste that has to get filled. That would have to get filled right to the top of those cliffs to be able to essentially mound it above, maybe 50 foot above at the center, and then have the stormwater run off to the sides and be collected as regular rainwater. Next slide. So, there are a lot of regulations on closing a landfill, and the good news is what's required for all landfills across the country under current regulations that have been in place for a number of years now, really began since the 70s. That the owner is responsible for this landfill for a minimum of 30 years after it closes. It has to continually maintain it. Next. So, to put a cap on it, this is essentially what the cap looks like. We go from waste at the bottom of the photograph here, and there's basically two types of caps. What's really different here is just how the caps are constructed. The bottom line is we put in intermediate cover, then we put in a subgrade, then we put in a liner, an impervious liner that no additional rainwater or liquid would go into the waste, essentially to dry it out over time. And then soil goes on top of it and vegetation. Next slide. So the challenge is how to design this. This landfill was never designed to close before it was filled. In fact, most landfills, if you were to close them early, you would have to go for a major permit modification. But on a traditional landfill, it really wouldn't be that difficult. It just means it would be as tall as you had anticipated. In this landfill, it's quite a challenge. Next. I mentioned the level, so this is a problem. We've got a hole. So if we were to close this landfill right now, and imagine us putting a liner, impervious liner, to protect the waste from additional moisture. If we were to put that there, all the rainwater, the snow, would all pile up on top of this liner. We'd have no place to go but to ultimately put pressure on the liner and cause a failure. Next. Okay, so again, this photograph gives a pretty good perspective of what we're talking about. As you can see, that cliff behind me, which doesn't even have a top on the top photograph, the bottom one shows the south corner. It's actually the southeast corner. All of that would have to be waste and above in order to get it closed. We have to stabilize the rocks and so on. Next. So how would we do it? Well, it's never been done. That being said, I'm confident we can come up with some solutions, but they're all going to be very challenging. They're going to be very expensive to be able to manage. And so while, this is one scenario that we've looked at is, how could we potentially gather the liquid into a center place in the landfill and be able to get it to drain out by gravity preferably, so we didn't have to run a pump 24 hours a day. Next slide. When we do a cover, there's a tie-in, and this is what the tie-in looks like. Actually, it's out of the permit drawing for this landfill. And it locks in, again, this cover so that no additional liquid can get in here. It also provides really a barrier to any gas or odors. At the same time, gas wells have to be installed and maintained throughout the closure period, well beyond the day it closes. The 30-year period is also a period where we have to get the gas to settle down, if you will. The gas has a curve, bell curve of how it produces from the time it's put in the landfill until the time it ages out and stops producing gas. Next one. Again, this is again a cross section of what it would look like. You can see the narrower sections at the bottom where we are today and really what it was supposed to look like when it was full. Next slide. So, gas system. The gas system has to be maintained. The leachate has to be maintained, and the gradient control has to be maintained. I touched on that a little bit. Randy mentioned a couple of things earlier. With regard to the gas system in 2020 only averaged about 250 CFMs of gas, cubic feet per minute of gas coming out of this landfill. For the size of this landfill, it should be much, much higher. The improvements that were done last January, February, March raised that up, and really through some efforts of the landfill with condensation and this first wave, we're averaging about 350 now. So wow, that's a pretty big increase. Why don't we see that impact? Well, we need to monitor that number, because that number should be north of 1,000. So we've come a ways, we've made some incremental improvements, but we still have a long ways to go. Next. So how do we do this? So the real challenge with this is we have to first figure out how to engineer it. Then we have to present it to DEQ, and really not even present it to DEQ. If we do this, we will work side by side with DEQ because of the urgency. But it's going to really be a challenge to come up with a way to do this, and then how do we build it, and how do we construct it, and then where do we go. So this timeline essentially looks at almost best case scenario how we would do this. It's going to take a number of months or a year to do the engineering, the approval process, construction drawings, construction, ultimately then to some closure. And there's a lot of steps along the way. Next slide. So, it's typically, it would take 6 months or more to plan for this type of closure. With this one, it's going to take much longer. We have to figure out how to tie in the existing liner. So as Randy illustrated, the liner comes out the wall. So how do we tie that liner into a cover? Currently, it was anticipated that the liner would go up over the lip of the landfill, flip wall, and then be tied into that trench that I showed you earlier. Next slide. So, what are our options? Where do we go from here? This is a pretty good shot to illustrate what the liner looks like as it goes up the wall. The trash gets put up against this. This is not typical. It's not been done, to my knowledge, before to close a quarry landfill with municipal solid waste early like this. That being said, nothing is impossible, but there are a lot of challenges with it. Either way, we have to control the gas. Either way, we have to have the gas wells. We have to be able to control the leachate and collect the gradient down below, and all of those processes. And I guess I'll just wrap up with really, what do we anticipate? We're certain that deep wells will make a difference. Whether there'll be enough, whether there's other mitigating factors that we're going to have to deal with, I would say there probably is. Could we need additional wells? Do we need to make sure we can block off any venting that's coming up along the walls? All of these things are going to happen. What we found is there's so much water in this landfill. And water is, what it does is it accelerates the decomposition. And in fact, earlier landfills were really experimenting, adding water to landfills to accelerate decomposition to make more gas. Well, the problem with that is you get to a point where it's too much. And that's really what we have. We've got a landfill that's extremely wet. Well, these gas wells will take the odor out. The other real benefit is getting liquid out of the top. So we're pumping liquid out of the bottom, but we'll now with these wells be able to pump liquid out of the top and try to get this trash drier and try to slow the decomposition down to a level that's more manageable. That's all I have. If we have some questions later on, take them.
Ernie, we appreciate that. As Ernie said, we'll be more happy to take questions now. I will say that this presentation will be posted on the city website later today, and I believe the videos will go up sometime later this week, if I'm not mistaken. I believe, Beth, you want to share this with your chamber, is that right? So the video and the slides will be going up momentarily. So we'll take any questions.
So Beth has a microphone, hopefully it's working. So if you have a question, and what I would encourage, there's other opportunities for public comment. I would encourage us take this time, since we've got the city here, ask questions to the benefit of everybody here so you can get additional information. Again, I know Randy's door is open. There's opportunities to come to city council to just make comment, express your concern, but please, if you have questions, you've got the right individuals here, both consultants, DEQ, and Randy, so please raise your hand and Beth will try to get the microphone to you.
I just have one question. I guess it's really directed to the chamber board. This presentation was presented at the last chamber board. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there for another commitment, but I would have probably asked this question at that time as well. Is there any plans to have a similar meeting to where we can get some of the community folks that's impacted the most, that's really been experiencing horrific pains with this, to present their side or let the chamber members hear them directly and to see their faces and their eyes?
I'll be happy to at least address that in part, Mayor. Again, the chamber's purpose is really to serve its members, right? And the businesses that make up those members and their employees and so forth. And so that's why we've done this, is to help our membership better understand the situation. There certainly is probably a need for other forums. I know City Council meets every other week, basically, and has opportunities for public comment. I know there's been other public events for that purpose, but I think for purposes of the chamber, we wanted to help facilitate information flow to our members.
Randy, I was at the Zoom meeting with the Bridgeport, Missouri folks as well. And I don't remember if they said this, but my question would be, engineering-wise, is it likely that our residents are going to get some relief within a week or two of starting to add the connections for the wells? You mentioned that it's going to be 3 or 4 wells at a time. And I don't know if we even know where the most affected areas are in the landfill, but is it likely that we may be seeing some relief within a week or two of the connection of those wells?
I'll answer that real quickly, and I think Ernie may be able to add something to that. As you said, you were on that call, and I do believe everyone in Bridgeton said that the issues that we have here are fixable, and it appeared to them that we are are doing the right things based on the experiences they had. It took them 10 years to get any action from their local or state government in order to begin that process. So they were dealing with this odor for 10 years. And I know people in our community have now been dealing with it for about a year. And I know that it's significant. I know people have suffered. I know that they can't sleep at night. I know that it impacts their children when they try to go out and play. Because I've been out there, I've smelled it too. So I do think that over time, you will start seeing a decrease in odor. That's what the experts have told us. That's what we heard from the folks out in Richmond as well. So Ernie, if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's another factor that we can't really discount, that is the weather. You know, a lot of these odors that impact people are really based on weather, something we can't control. You know, how does this odor emanate out of this landfill and drift down to certain neighborhoods more than others? And that really is the weather itself. It's the barometer, it's the temperature. And as Randy said, in the wintertime, it typically gets better. This warm air with these odors will rise up and not get trapped. That being said, the wells will have an incremental effect and a positive effect. You know, when we get to critical mass to the point where you can really tell the difference, we're going to tell the difference with every additional cubic foot of gas that we're able to burn, either at the plant or the flare. So I told you today we're at 350. When we're at 450, that's the increase in gas, the fugitive gases that we've been able to collect. Now, whether that 100 increase will affect how everybody smells this landfill, again, some of it is based on weather. Even a perfect landfill can have some odors if all the conditions are right. But there will be an incremental improvement. It's not going to be, you know, next week you'll smell difference. Although that being said, and we've had a lot of these comments, people say, well, we had a great week, what did they do? Well, Mother Nature did it, we didn't do it. There is a fair amount of odor that comes out of this landfill, but that odor is displaced by an infinite amount of air above the landfill and throughout the community. It's how it gets concentrated, and our noses are able to pick up levels that sometimes even our meters can't pick up. So it's a multi-answer here, I know, but you will start to see some progression, and we'll be able to measure how well we're doing. When, let's say we get to 1,000 CFM and we still have odors, we need to then look at putting more gas wells in. We'll need to catch more fugitive emissions, and that'll be the process ongoing.
The listening sessions that y'all had a couple of months ago, and you talked about when you could see a real fall off in the quality of the development of the landfill. It was like 2016, 2017, is that correct?
I think what he referred to there was the gas systems. That was the last time any gas wells were installed. It was 2016, 2017.
And so to follow up on that, you know, with methane gas, it's become quite an issue nationally about the green emissions and this, that, and the other, and that part of the Biden administration right now is looking to grossly reduce methane emissions and to put everything under a more sanctioned of lower levels of temperatures moving forward if in fact this is put into place. And there is a reliance on the methane gases for Ingenco and BDU. What is the course of action to be in compliance with any type of reduction of methane gases?
Randy, I was having trouble hearing.
She was wanting to.
Could you summarize that one?
Yeah, sure. She was asking, you know, what are we going to do to maintain compliance with the methane gases as we move forward based on the Biden administration's desire to reduce the amount of methane that is escaping into the atmosphere from various sources.
Well, you know, as I mentioned, really what we expect, how much gas this landfill produces is a calculation that's done as part of Subtitle P regulations and also part of the Title V requirements. So we essentially have the data on what should be captured, and that's really what we're working for. So we're working on all of our current regulations to make sure that we're capturing as much of this future gas as possible. I will say that with this focus on this landfill, our goal is to exceed those minimum regulations. And if there are additional regulations that are put in for capturing methane and VOCs, the landfill will essentially be pretty well positioned to continue to expand their gas system to be able to meet any new regulations that come in.
And I have just one
But
last.
first, we have to catch up with where we need to be as of today's regulations.
Thank you. I have just one other question. This is for Randy and for council. With citizens in the perimeter of the landfill and those that, as you have said, it floods. I mean, it's very difficult to know when it's going to hit, but there are some that are being hit more and more and more often. Does the city have any plans to assist some of these who don't have the actual revenues to assist themselves for alternate housing or for alternate filtration systems into their homes while this is being taken care of?
You know, the city's reached out to the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. We've reached out to the United Way and maybe one other organization as well for assistance in that. At this time, the city is not prepared to give financial assistance to those that have been impacted at this time.
Randy, you've mentioned before that you all believe that the chimney at the southeast end of the landfill is problematic, releasing the most gas, odor, everything else. With these installation of new gas wells, do you believe it would be possible to cap that chimney?
Well, yes. I think what we want to do is get the gas wells installed and get them hooked up. And then we can do an analysis once all that's hooked up to determine how much we've been able to draw down from that chimney. And then depending on that, we can either potentially maybe have to put in a gas well closer to that chimney than what we already have, or we'll be able to cap that chimney to force that gas back into the system.
Is there any sort of estimated timeline on that?
I think we'll be able to really make an analysis on that after everything's completed and we get that negative pressure and that vacuum built up. So my guess is we're probably looking mid-December, mid-January.
You mentioned the Smell My City app, and I know there's also a form online with a picture of the library. Which of those is the best way for us to submit information? And is there any public publishing of what types of things are being submitted? You mentioned, I think, 50 per day right now about.
Yeah, we're getting probably about 50 per day on average. The best one, the official one that we follow is the one that's on the city website. We also download the Smell My City app information as well. Anybody can download the Smell My City app information from any computer or cell phones. That's something anybody can look at and look at those odors. I'm actually reviewing the Freedom of Information Act to determine how we can release that information, because there is personal identifying information that people put into the city website. I don't want to release information that doesn't necessarily have to be released and be an intrusion on people's lives.
Anyone else?
Well, everyone, I appreciate the questions here today. I appreciate the comments. More importantly, I appreciate you all coming out to listen. Really being able to communicate this information to people who are willing to listen and try to understand what the processes that we have put in place and the processes that will be put in place moving forward, I think is significant. I recognize this is a significant community issue. I recognize that it impacts people's lives on a daily basis. And I can just tell you that's not something my city council is happy with, and it's not something I'm happy with. We want this solved as quickly as possible. I do believe it can be solved based on what the experts have told us, based on what the folks in Bridgeton, Missouri have told us, based on what DEQ has said, and based on what the Tennessee Department of Environmental Control has said. They believe the steps we are taking will correct these issues. It's just not going as quickly as any of us would like. Once again, the questions here today, I believe, were very informative. I think the vast majority of questions came from Bristol, Tennessee City Council members. As you all know, we have an open door policy. You can reach out to us at any time. There's no reason that we can't have a line of communication to give you all the information that you need in order to inform your constituents, just as we do. So with that being said, thank you all. As Jason mentioned earlier, I'm available just about 24/7. You won't find me on social media anymore, but you can find me in my office, or you can shoot me an email and I'll be more happy to answer any question that I can. Thank you.